All right. Well, for those of you who have made it, we sincerely apologize for the technical difficulties, but we appreciate you hanging in there and joining us here. We're very excited to talk about um, the Frick Environmental Center Sensory Classroom project that we've been working on the past few months. And we're really looking forward to talking about it with you all and getting your feedback. So a couple quick meeting guidelines before we get too far ahead. We're asking everyone, please stay muted. Um, Especially if you're eating your lunch on your lunch hour. But more importantly, some people might have closed captioning enabled. So when there's a lot of background noise, that can mess up the captioning. So we're just asking everyone stay muted to keep the captioning clear for folks who need it. If you have a question, a comment, something you need repeated, just please use the raise hand function. And we'll be sure to take breaks and call on people as necessary. Also, if you have comments or questions, we ask that you please use the private chat function and send any of your comments directly to Erin Tobin. The reason being, if folks are using screen readers, it'll pick up on the chat, which can be kind of confusing and drown out other conversation. So just send it privately to Erin. She'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll find parts in the presentation to stop and read out any comments or questions and respond to them in the presentation. So a quick agenda for today. We want to do a brief project introduction for those of you who haven't been involved in this project yet, just kind of giving you a sense of the project team, the project goals, and what we're hoping to accomplish. Then we'll dive in to go through some of the initial feedback that we received through some of the different engagement efforts we've done to date, and then present some design concepts that our design consultant has put together that responds directly to that feedback. And then open it up for discussion. Depending on how many people we get, we might be going into breakout rooms to do some questions and answers, but we'll see where we are at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So just to introduce ourselves and the team, my name is Brandon Riley. I'm the Capital Projects Manager at the Parks Conservancy. I'm the one who is in charge of managing this whole project, but also one of the facilitators for this meeting. I'm joined by Erin Tobin, our Community Engagement Manager, and Catherine Huninen, our Senior Manager of Special Initiatives, who are really instrumental to leading the community engagement efforts around this project and are also co-facilitators for these engagement meetings. And also with us today is Ross Chapman, our Chief of Operations and Park Equity, who's providing kind of oversight and supervision over this entire process. We are also joined by Pashik MTR, who is our design consultant for this project. With us from Pashik is Kara Rogenkamp, who's a principal and lead landscape architect and project manager for the Pashik team, as well as Alex Swaggett, who's the lead project designer from their team. Pashik has a lot of experience in projects similar to what we're designing. They're, award-winning landscape architects. They've worked on sensory gardens, a lot of public park projects, nature trails, etc. So they're well suited to be the design lead on this project, and we're very fortunate to have them on our team. Just briefly about the Parks Conservancy for folks who may or may not be super familiar with us. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to improve the lives of Pittsburgh residents by restoring their park system to excellence. So we work in close partnership with the city on programming, projects, maintenance of existing park spaces, all done with respect for the historic integrity of these spaces. Pittsburgh's a very historic place, as well as respect for the environment and sustainability, and the diverse needs of the different park users there are across the city, but all in line in that mission to really bring the parks back to be an amenity for the health and use of Pittsburgh residents. The Frick Environmental Center, where we're proposing this project to happen, which you see an image of on your screen here, is really kind of the embodiment of that mission or those goals. This is a LEED Platinum living building, so it's cutting edge in sustainability and sustainable living, sustainable building. It also, the landscape area around the Frick Environmental Center respects a lot of the historic design and the history of Frick Park and what had been there prior to the Environmental Center. And it's also a hub of our educational programming, which really focuses on educating Pittsburgh residents and park users about the natural environment a lot of nature-based programming and education events and opportunities. So it really serves as the gateway to Frick Park and is really meant to try and introduce park users to explore Frick Park and be more connected to their natural world and the city's park system as a whole. Next slide, please. So it's a really ideal location for the project that we're trying to accomplish. While the Frick Environmental Center does a lot of these great things, it can do a lot of them better. So the goal for this project is to create a series of sensory experiences in and around the natural landscape around Frick Park, designed for specifically learners with exceptionalities, persons with disabilities, but the general park users as a whole. It's really meant to engage people and connect them to their natural world, to learn about the natural world around them through their senses. These spaces are intended to be designed with universal design for learning principles and inclusive principles, accessibility principles, meaning that these spaces are designed to accommodate learners of all abilities, and the different accommodations that need to be considered are designed at the forefront when we're doing this work, and that inclusivity is just woven through the design of these spaces, so that it's useful and is an enjoyable experience for anyone, whether you're here as part of a program, an educational program that's being run by PPC, whether you are here some other facilitator is using these spaces, or if you're just walking through the site on your own. It's meant to be something for everyone that people can really enjoy and get in touch with nature. The next slide, please. Where we are in the project process. We started back in October, kind of what we call the listening and learning phase, where we assembled an advisory committee that has representatives from the city, as well as stakeholders from accessibility advocate groups, educators across the city to help guide the process. Through meeting with those folks, we assembled a focus group that had additional stakeholders that represented those different populations of Pittsburgh to get some of their initial feedback, mostly focusing on what kind of challenges these folks deal with when they try and engage in nature play spaces or the natural world. What kind of things would they like to see in the type of space that we're developing? And then we also did a public survey that asked a lot of the same questions, but also tried to understand, how do people use the Frick Environmental Center now? How do they use Frick Park? What's missing? What are ideas that they have for the future, et cetera? Taking all that feedback and developed design concepts, which is what we're presenting to you all today. This is the first of 3 public meetings that we're having about our design concepts. We have another stakeholder kind of in-person workshop January 26th at 6 p.m. if you're interested in attending, or another one on Saturday at the FEC at 10 a.m. Presenting a lot of the same information that we're presenting to you today, just in a different format, a little more interactive. And then we'll also have another public survey asking people questions and feedback about the designs we're presenting to you today. Later on in the process, we're going to take all of that feedback and kind of create one preferred design option. And then we're going to go through this whole process again. We'll have 3 public meetings. We'll have a survey, gathering as much input as we can from people to make sure the design is the best it can be and is meeting everyone's needs. And then after that, Paschak MTR is going to develop that design to a point where we have construction level documents and permit ready documents. One thing that's important to note is currently Parks Conservancy does not have construction funding to build this project. We just have design funding. But our goal is to advance it to a point where it's a shovel ready project, where we can either get that construction funding while we're in design, or once we have the design, go out and get the funding, and we'll be ready to build as soon as the construction dollars come in. So that's kind of an overview of the schedule. Quick overview of the site and kind of where we're talking about. The image on the left shows Frick Park in the location of the Frick Environmental Center, kind of in the northwest corner of Frick Park on the Squirrel Hill side of the park. The image on the right shows a bit more zoomed in where we're talking about. For those who have been here, you're probably familiar with the Frick Environmental Center, the historic gatehouses, the From Slavery to Freedom Garden, public restrooms, and parking under a solar array, et cetera. So there's a lot of pretty cool site features here. And what we're trying to do is not compete with any of those, but actually just enhance and augment the experience that we have here at the FEC. So the focus area that we're looking at is sort of the meadow and woodland area to the east, or I don't know what direction we're looking at on this map. It's a little confusing, but I think to the east of the environmental center. And the next slide might show it a little more clear.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, this is confusing, but it's just due to the location of that aerial photo.
Yeah.
We are flipped around 180 degrees, but north is up on this map.
Yeah, so this is how we'll be looking at the plans from now on. So this is a good image to zoom in on. But here you can see the fountain that some folks might be familiar with. It's kind of at the end of the alley. The existing nature play space, which you might see a shade structure up there at certain times of year, but a lot of PPC programming, camp programming comes out is occupied in that space throughout the year. The nature trail that some folks might be familiar with, it's directly off the South Clayton Loop, but it's a narrow paved path that winds its way through the woodland there, and then the observation deck that kind of overlooks the whole area. This is really our primary project area. This is where we're focusing the bulk of the improvements that we'd like to show you today. So kind of keep this in the back of your mind as you're looking through the design concepts, which we'll show you later. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit more context, this is that nature play space we were talking about. It has a gathering area as well as a mud kitchen. It's where our education team does a lot of their programming, a lot of their teaching, which is really nature-based teaching, sensory-based play, sensory-based teaching. So it's a great informal space for that, but it lacks accessibility. It's not fully inclusive. So there are certain populations who cannot access this asset based on those drawbacks. Next slide, please. And then the nature trail, this paved trail that some of you may be familiar with, that winds through the forest area. I think it was constructed in the late 80s or early 90s. At one point, that was a fully ADA compliant trail with the intent of making it fully accessible and giving people this experience. However, years of deferred maintenance, etc., it is no longer an accessible trail. But the opportunity to use that trail again, to augment spaces on that trail, to be able to give people this experience of being in the woods, in the forest, is something that we're trying to tap into here, as well as the observation deck. Really unique kind of space in Frick Park. It's very popular with just general park users as well as our ed team doing programming out here, but it gives you the sense of being up in the tree canopy. And kind of a unique experience that you don't really feel elsewhere in the park. But again, not fully accessible, not necessarily code compliant. So there's a lot of opportunity in these existing spaces to make this more inclusive and more accommodating. And just some of the current uses that are out there now. So you look at the top left image, some of the things that PPC staff run with these tree cookies, where you can kind of pick them up and see what kind of critters are living underneath. Or the image on the top right, that's the mud kitchen, kind of tactile sensory play. It can be kind of imaginative. Kids can pretend that they're baking, but they can kind of do what they want. The image on the lower right is taken from the nature trail, but there's opportunities for discovery, to learn through just kind of discovery of what's around you. And then the image on the lower left, these spaces are used for just informal play. It doesn't have to be structured, but they're popular for these uses. And these are things that we want to continue. These are uses that we want to accommodate for, but we want to make sure everyone has access to these types of uses, because right now it's just not set up to be that way. So those are some of the driving goals behind what we're doing here. Next slide, please. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Kara at Pashik to quickly run through some of our initial feedback that we've gotten to date.
Thanks, Brandon. So as Brandon mentioned, we have spent the past couple months, really listening, talking with a lot of different people, including our advisory committee for this project, focus groups with, folks with various forms of expertise related to the project, as well as a general survey that was available for the public to take on Engage PGH. Oops, hold on a second, I'm gonna hide the meeting control so I can see my slide. So we've kind of, there's a lot of detail that came out of that. We've kind of distilled that into some of the key things that we heard repeatedly. And we really did hear a lot of the same feedback from lots of different people. So one of the first and most important things, it seems probably pretty obvious, is that you cannot enjoy nature if you cannot get there. So accessible pathways were very important. That came out of all the sessions. And that includes what the surface is, how uneven it is, how steep it is, and also the width. So the wider the path, the more easily folks can pass each other. Folks who might have sensory issues might feel more comfortable, fewer crowds, less passing of people. The easier it is for the Parks Conservancy to use it for their educational programs with groups. So that's one of the things we'll look at as we get into the designs, is the width of the pathways and making them more accessible than they currently are. We heard that it could be important to have both areas that are closer to the point of arrival, as well as more longer and challenging loops. And that it's important to connect those accessible trails and routes to where people are coming from, be that parking or the drop-off area or the nearest transit stop. We also heard that comfort is important to folks when they're coming to a place to experience nature. Restrooms are very, very important. So we're lucky to have that at the Frick Environmental Center. Shade, a lot of folks are sensitive to heat and also to sun exposure. Seating and rest areas, different types of seating, perhaps different heights, benches with armrests. So if you need to push yourself up out of a seat, you can do that. Places where wheelchairs can be next to a bench, for example. So we really want to think about all different ways that people will be engaging with this space. And also providing, this really came out of it, that people view Frick Park as a place to come to experience calm and quiet and the natural beauty of nature. So we wanted to make sure that this project is really helping people experience their senses and enhancing their senses, and that we're providing calm and quiet places along the way. And finally, on this slide, the legibility of spaces emerged as important. So that's everything from the amount of information that's available about the accessibility of a space or a place before you visit, perhaps on the Parks Conservancy's website, for example, the information that's provided when you get there, perhaps through wayfinding signs, and then all those subtle cues that help you orient yourself in a space. So having defined, say, path materials so that you, there's that subtle cue that you are on the right path. Having transition zones between spaces that might be used in different ways, and even having defined boundaries around certain spaces. And you'll see in some of the design concepts, we are potentially looking at some low-key fencing around certain areas. We also heard from the focus groups and the survey that there are many different features in nature that folks find appealing and engaging. And one really important aspect of nature is that while it is sensory rich, there's a lot of different things to see and smell and hear. It's also calming, and it also it captures your attention. There's interesting things to see. So it's really a restorative thing, and that's something that, again, we want to enhance and not take away from with this design. Other types of features that emerged in the survey and in the focus groups were, to think about all ages, not just children, but also seniors and people who are middle-aged. And so we're really looking at the full spectrum of the public who might be visiting this space. Providing multiple ways to access any activity that's provided. So, for example, thinking about wheelchair users and thinking about people of different heights, people with different abilities in terms of their senses, We want to engage multiple senses at once. And we want to think about all the senses, not just the 5 that we might have been taught about at one point, but also balance is one of your senses, proprioception, the sense of yourself in space. And this idea that we have places where you can engage with nature. It's not off limits. There are things you can touch. There are places where you're encouraged to move your body, and that we do that in just a wide variety of ways. So I'm going to move now into the real heart of this presentation, and probably the moment you've been waiting for, which is to look at the design concepts that we've come up with so far. We are at a very early stage of design. Nothing is really set in stone. We have gotten quite a bit of feedback already from the Parks Conservancy and some feedback from our advisory committee as well. But you'll see that we've provided lots of different options, and what we'd really like from everyone today is for us to give us your first impressions. Let us know your preferences. Let us know if we're missing something that you find important. We really want that feedback, and that will help us move forward with this design and refine it and allow us to have the best, possible arrangement here and elements. So this is the first concept. We have 2 to present to you, and just looking at this kind of zoomed out and as an overview, just to kind of orient us to the site plan. Again, north is up. So the historic gatehouses and accessible drop-off area are over here up in the upper left. The parking area is kind of up in the corner here. There are 2 accessible parking spaces currently. The public restrooms are here. The From Slavery to Freedom Garden is here. So this is that long access to the fountain and the Frick Environmental Center here. So when you're arriving at the Frick Environmental Center, a lot of times people will park over here, they'll walk along the path and come into the building on this end, and then circulate back out to the fountain. And our project site encompasses the existing nature play space, which is right about in here near this oak tree you saw in some of those pictures. This is Clayton Hill and the meadow that you see up in here. And then this is the South Clayton Loop Trail. Existing entrance to the nature trail is down here. So with concept 1, we are making some modifications to the lower meadow area, and we'll zoom in on that area in a moment. We are also creating a loop through the nature trail area, somewhat sticking to the existing path alignment, but changing it a little bit because we do want to widen the path and create some accessible points of interest along the way. You'll see that the observation deck is a spur off of that loop path. And there is another spur off of it, which will primarily be used by the Frick Environmental Center's educational programs, kind of as a shortcut. So I want to also just quickly overview where the accessible routes would be. We have already delved into what we call grading studies, where we're looking at very closely at the existing topography and trying to meet, there are standards for accessible trails. They are different than the standards that would be applied, inside a building, for example, for ADA compliance. But that gives us a point of reference for the things that we are trying to achieve to make this meet those accessible trail standards. And so everything you see here in purple would meet those accessible trail standards or better. So you'll see here we have the accessible parking. All of these paths around the Frick Environmental Center are quite flat and accessible. Currently, pretty much none of the trails past there are. They could be with some modifications. So for example, there is a little bit of a kind of a drop off here where you leave the fountain plaza. That would be, that could be remedied. So we would probably look at resurfacing and fixing up this trail a little bit, just some slight interventions. But with this project and in option 1, we would be creating an accessible loop through the meadow, which doesn't exist currently. as well as some spaces off of that I'll describe in a moment. And then this entire loop path, as well as the connection to the observation deck, would also meet those accessible trail standards. I will say that the meadow area being closer to the parking, closer to the environmental center, closer to the restrooms, and also just at about, a similar elevation would be easier to get to. Of course, it's a longer trip to get over to the nature trail area and a lot more elevation change as well. So I'm going to delve into some of the specifics of this design. And as I mentioned, there's a second option as well. And I have some character images to show after this to kind of help you visualize some of the proposed improvements. So concept one, as I mentioned, would create this accessible loop trail that is roughly the same, a little bigger size as the Fountain Plaza right now. We would really be fitting this into the existing topography without a whole lot of change, but just enough so that we can eliminate some unnecessary up and down and make the path also a little bit smoother to travel. We're proposing adding potentially some stone seat walls to frame the meadow, which would create a kind of a neat edge to it while still allowing everyone to experience those beautiful pollinator plants and grasses. The Parks Conservancy's education staff over the years has done activities such as seed bombs, where you put mud and seeds together and throw them out into the meadow, which has really increased its diversity and its value as an educational resource. But not everybody can get to that resource right now. So this seat wall would frame the meadow, also provide seating. We would create some little gathering areas that are a little wider along this path. This path would be 8 feet wide, which is about the same as the other paths in that area right now. And for example, these side paths that frame the environmental center area. And they would be, we haven't completely settled on what material those paths would be, but it would be a nice, smooth, hard, accessible surface. And then just located as kind of a spur off of that circle path would be a nature discovery space. And this would be tucked into the existing trees. We have that oak tree you saw in the pictures with the mud kitchen under it right over here. We have that neat little dogwood grove that forms almost a tunnel when you're coming down this path currently. And what we would like to do there is have a space that could be used for those kind of nature discovery programs that the Parks Conservancy does. Everything from the mud kitchen to building with natural materials to collecting, the kinds of programs that the Parks Conservancy does with school groups and also with summer camps with the nature play dates. We would provide tables and seating, at multiple heights to accommodate people of different stature. And we would also include some storage so that the educators could have some natural materials there to work with. And it'd be a shorter distance to get those. In this option, we're showing that nature discovery space as well as some adjacent area surrounded by a fence. And the reason for that is we did hear from some parents, educators, and caregivers that when you're doing programs out in nature, sometimes it's nice to have a defined boundary and edge to that space where you know that your students aren't going to roam too far, and that also you can kind of point it out, don't go past that fence. So we want to put that out there for discussion. That could be anything from kind of a low split rail, more of a visual indicator. It could also, if the preferences could be a little bit more, sturdy or solid if need be. So that whole area would be part of that nature discovery space, and it could be gated off if need be for educational programs. I also want to point out on these plans that we have kind of preliminarily, some general locations for wayfinding signs potentially and for interpretive information. I'll show you some images of some ideas for those kinds of features. Obviously, there is a vocabulary for those kinds of signs already in the parks. We really just want to enhance the inclusiveness of the information provided and make sure that we're indicating to folks where the accessible areas are, so that they're prepared and don't end up on a steep path when they didn't mean to be. So that is the nature discovery space. Moving down along the path, we'll come to what we're calling now the sensory nature trail. So the entry for that in this option would be very close to where the entry is now. We have some large trees along the path right here that are actually, the trunks are pushing the trail for both sides. So we need to try to work around existing trees with this design. Our goal is to preserve all of the trees on the site and not have to remove any. And we're very aware of the impact that construction can have on trees' root zones. So we are really trying to sensitively work among the existing trees. At the same time, there are also some areas where we have clearings where we can create some larger spaces for gatherings. So we're going to continue to explore these concepts on site and fine tune them, but we have looked at where the existing trees are, and this base map that we have was developed by a surveyor, so we have these locations pretty accurately. So this trail, we're really approaching this, particularly the nature trail, as a place for enhancing and exploring nature, using your senses in a way that is relaxing, enjoyable, and really takes advantage of all the best things that nature has to offer. The entrance would be here. And so if you went to the right, I'll explain some of the features that could be found along the way. So one of the ones we have here is that the opportunity to use the hillside that's coming down, create a widening in the path, and kind of a raised bed, potentially using something like the same kind of stone wall that might be up in the nature discovery space. And what we can do with that is we can bring the forest floor up a little bit higher for people who can't get down on the ground. Maybe they are using a wheelchair, maybe they have arthritis in their knees or something like that. It would allow something like that tree cookie exercise, maybe some permanent exploration tools like a permanent magnifying lens, something like that, allow us to put those a little bit higher up. So doing some of the same activities that the Parks Conservancy does now, but enhancing the inclusiveness and accessibility of those features. We also have some areas for seating, little bump outs with a place for a bench, something like a viewing station, and I'll show a picture of that, sensory enhancers. And so the trail winds through the trees. There's some really lovely, like this is a kind of an oak, a big oak tree that at some point in its early life, it sprouted multiple trunks. So some of these features along here are really features of the beautiful woodland that is there now. Along this stretch, it's a little bit flatter, a few more clearings. So we're able to do things like maybe we could put in some permanent hammock posts so that people could bring their own hammock and enjoy hanging out in the woods. Or maybe you could even check out hammocks from the Frick Environmental Center to use. Over here, we have some more movement related features. So log steppers that kids could walk on and balance and go from one to the other. But again, with that really natural aesthetic, really doing some of the same things that have been done in the nature space already, but in a way that would be more accessible. So we would make sure that the slopes were relatively flat, that we had accessible surfacing, those kinds of features. Even if you're not able to jump up on them, you might be able to reach out and touch them or explore them in other ways. We'd also like to include something like a fort, timber fort. I'll show you a picture of what that might look like. And then, as I mentioned previously, there would be a spur trail down to the observation deck. We have about 24 feet of elevation change from the observation deck up to our entrance point here. The length of the trail helps us get there in a way that keeps us within that accessible trail standard for slopes. And the observation deck, is a wonderful amenity. It's used a whole lot by the Parks Conservancy as well as by the general public. And we really want to keep those things that make it special intact while also making some of the upgrades that Brandon mentioned. So in all likelihood, the decking will need to be replaced. It is pretty slippery at times. The railing is not high enough to meet the current code. I think we also would like to make sure that it is a little bit more transparent so that if you're a little kid or if you are seated, that railing's not right at your eye level. You're not trying to climb it so that you can see over. So we'll be looking at a new railing, new decking. We'd like to keep seating as part of the deck design. We might add tables. And we're thinking about adding some observation tools around it. So that this observation deck, really is about exploring the forest from that canopy height.
Kara, I just want to give a time check. We've got about 15 minutes left. Maybe some folks can stay on after for more comments
15
and
minutes
questions.
total. That's right, because we
Total.
started late.
We started
Sorry
late.
about that. Yes, okay. Well, I will breeze through concept 2. I will say that you'll see some differences off the bat here with the overview. I'm going to skip over to the part where we've colored the accessible trails. And one of the main differences you'll see is that in this option, we've taken this is a gravel trail that runs behind the Frick Environmental Center. And some parts of it are not currently accessible, both the surface and also the slope and the cross slope. So in this option, we are rerouting that trail down closer to where the nature trail entrance is now. And what that allows us to do is to dip down and put the entrance to the loop down lower so that we can add the observation deck as part of the loop instead of a spur trail. That does make these paths pretty close to each other though. And you'll see, I'll zoom in here, the nature discovery space, a lot of the same elements. So we're creating, again, accessible gathering spaces for flexible nature projects and discovery. In this case, there is no loop trail, although we would make all of these connecting paths accessible. So you'd still be able to experience the meadow, along these trails. And instead, we've created 2 gathering spaces, which could be, very helpful. For example, when the Parks Conservancy has a whole bunch of school groups out there, 2 groups could potentially use these spaces. I've wanted to mention that in the previous scheme, we had a shade arbor over the top of the gathering space. We have that here around this one. We're relying on the surrounding trees for shade. A lot of the same features in terms of things like the mud kitchen, storage. This gathering deck would be kind of cantilevered out over the existing slope. So you would come in on grade here, and then down here at the low corner, you'd be about 4 feet off the ground. So it'd be kind of an observation deck type of context. And this, just very quickly, this version of the Sensory Nature Trail, I mentioned how the location of it is a little bit different. We also have a few different features. This one is a little bit steeper in general, so there are fewer places to create openings and gathering spaces. And I'll show you some pictures of what some of those might be. So just to run quickly through some concept images, here are some of the materials that we're all familiar with that are used quite frequently in Frick Park. It's a really nature-oriented place with a lot of natural materials like stone and wood. And we want to continue to pick up on that vocabulary as we look at the materials used in the sensory trail and garden spaces. We are looking at potentially, how we might create some shade, particularly in the meadow, adjacent to the meadow spaces, something like a pergola, picking up on some of that vocabulary from the environmental center, maybe with a little additional shade added. Here's an example of the stone walls I was talking about that could be used for seating and to help frame these spaces. There's the opportunity to incorporate some artwork. These are sandblasted leaves that actually have a texture that you can feel as well as see. Here are some examples of some of the things that might be in the nature discovery space. And we would want to make sure that we have made those accessible. So for example, we have a mud kitchen that you can roll under with a wheelchair. But a lot of that would be really loose parts, nature play, nature art projects, stuff that the Parks Conservancy can use in their educational programs. Moving on to the sensory nature trail, that would have wheelchair accessible surfaces. Potentially there's some areas where we might be adding some borders along the edge, whether those are boulders. We want to use, potentially paving that can bring in some of that nature theme. We haven't decided on any paving materials, but we're looking at permeable paving as one of those options, which should help us with, our tree sensitivity. And we've been studying some examples of what's been done in other places with things, for example, braille trails. Some of these have been built with a rope guide or a cable guide along the edge so that someone who has low vision or a visual impairment can get around by themselves, not necessarily with a guide, as you see here. And those are connected into interpretive stations with some ways to get to an audio trail interpretation, for example. Here's some examples of some of the features I described when we were going through some of those concepts. So here's the timber fort. Of course, kids could maybe even enhance that by putting their own sticks as a part of it. Log steppers or balance steppers, a viewing station. So I really like this kind of approach to, just encouraging folks to use their senses. So look up, look all around, look down, and tune in. Here's an example of what I was talking about with the forest floor exploration, that we might not necessarily build a garden there, but that we might, raise the level of the forest floor next to the path so that people can get closer to it. And we could provide something like a magnifier. We are thinking about including musical instruments or sound enhancers, but in a very, very subtle way. We don't want anything that's going to take away from the sounds of the birds. This is a pebble harp, and some of you may remember there was something similar at the Children's Museum at one point. It's basically a wood box with metal pins, and you drop little stones in it and makes a beautiful, very subtle tinkling sound. We might include elements such as, kind of a meditative component. There's this thing called forest bathing, where you immerse yourself in the sensory input of the forest, and it's very relaxing. Something like this finger labyrinth, where you can trace a path of a labyrinth on a stone. Perhaps there's the opportunity to incorporate some artwork that relates to nature. Seating areas that have wheelchair spaces next to them. This is the fallen log, where we could people could get up close to a fallen log and feel its texture, maybe balance on it. We'd set it up to be able to do that. And just some examples of some of the observation tools and enhancements that we might be looking at for the observation deck, both for seeing and for hearing. And just very briefly, my last concept image slide, just a little bit on information and interpretation. Of course, there is a signed standard for the parks that we would want to fit into, but we are looking at what has been done in other similar sensory trails. And so, for example, I mentioned this on the Braille trail. These signs provide in Braille information where you can use your phone to call into an audio tour, and it actually gives you a guide, basically a walking guide for the trail. And there's a number on it that relates to files that you can download from the Audubon Society's website, where you can hear that same information. So I guess we have a few minutes to discuss. Sorry that this started late. And I think we're going to break into breakout groups.
Well, yeah, I guess in the interest of time, maybe we just stay in all one room. We've got about 5 minutes for discussion. If people can join us longer, great. If not, you can send us feedback separately via email. We'll take it all in. We appreciate making the time. But the two questions we'd like to ask everyone. One is, what elements from each of the concepts did you like the best? One thing that's important to remember is we don't have to pick one concept or the other. We could pick parts that we like. So we want to kind of focus on what did you see that resonated with you from either concept? And then the second thing are there other sensory elements or inclusive features that are missing that you think should be included? Or are there challenges that you typically face when you go to a nature space that we're not addressing or we're not accommodating in some way? So we'll start it off there. We do have a question. Can we have both concepts up side by side? Is that easy to do, Kara?
Not really, but I can flip back to them and we can go back and forth.
Let's do that. Okay.
So I'm going to go back to concept one overall, and then if I should show a different one, just go ahead and speak up.
Okay.
So there's concept one, meadow loop, one gathering area, nature, kind of more widely spaced nature trail off of the existing trail, and observation deck as a spur trail. Concept two, in contrast, has two gathering areas up near the meadow. And it has this kind of rerouting of this trail, which, by the way, makes the amphitheater able to be accessible, although it's a long journey. And then it has the observation deck as part of a more compact loop. So those are really kind of the main differences. And I would say a lot of the features we showed, the potential sensory elements, we could probably kind of mix and match a little bit. If there's something that you really like from concept one, but it's not showing up in concept two, we could see if we could switch it out for something else. I'm seeing that we've got pending questions in the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, there's one question. Yeah, can you make some more comments on the loop in concept one? Michelle, are you just asking for a little more explanation or clarity?
To do the comparison between the loop and the one space with the fencing, which I love, by the way, and the two spaces, to lose the loop and get the two spaces, I'm trying to.
You mean this area, I guess.
Process behind what you expected to happen there.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a trade-off. There are some smaller gathering spaces here. So I think it has to do with the types of experiences. So concept one kind of offers a short, easy nature trail type of experience in the meadow, and a nature, discovery space. And I think because it has a loop trail, it does that kind of accessible walking experience a little bit more than this version. Now on this one, you could kind of do this loop. This is not meadow currently. So you'd be experiencing a kind of the edge of the meadow right here, and this would all be accessible. And then there'd be more nature discovery space. So it more has to do with kind of the amount of emphasis on one or the other. There's neither one is right or wrong. It's all subjective, like all design. Do you have a preference, Michelle, for one or the other?
Well, I'm excited about meadows, first of all, and that people see, feel, touch, and smell meadows.
Yeah.
As long as we can keep them a meadow, I won't go into that. So the fact is that to me, that's very exciting, but to have two gathering areas with a potential of two different emphasis of programming is also very nice. But I do like the fencing in the one, because I'm big on making sure there's containment and people can wander, and kids can, when you get excited kids, you're not yelling at them. They can only go so far, just like an excited dog. So, to me, fencing, that fencing thing that is lost in the gathering deck on two because of the way it is, like you said, there's advantages in everything. So that's just me.
Yeah, and you could kind of see how, let's see if I can get my comments up. You know, you could probably add fencing, you know, maybe here. I don't know, maybe we do it here, tie into there, and then, you know, maybe we kind of, I don't know, do that or something. You know, there's probably ways we could add fencing to concept 2.
I didn't want to lose a visible meadow that people
Yes.
don't have to go too far for, because people don't understand meadows. They don't get it. They don't, you know, they don't know the difference. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. And to me, to expose it, we do have the upper and lower meadow, but it's not as, you can't quite get into it the way you can and see it from various sides. That's all.
Thanks, Michelle. Norma, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I have 2 questions. Number 1, has anyone ever seen in the Frick Park area any poisonous snakes? And number 2, if I wanted more information about this, because I may write an article for the next newsletter of Penn State Master Gardeners coming up in the spring, which person and what number may I call?
So number 1, in terms of poisonous snakes, I have not that I'm aware of. We can certainly check in with city's public safety to see if there's been any poisonous snake sightings. I know in the news a few years ago, there was that rat snake sighting that sent reverberations through the media that people posted on social media, but that's not a poisonous snake. But we can check on that. In terms of projects information for the future, I'm your best point of contact. If you want to, I can private message you my number after the fact and my contact information, and you can reach out to me and you have any questions. That makes
Okay.
sense?
Sure. You have my email?
I
Yeah.
do, and I can actually, I'll send you a private chat message right now with that. so
Thank
can
you.
record it. Sure. We are after 1 o'clock, so I just want to, if people want to get going, we recognize you already gave us some of your time. We got a late start. I did want to point out that we are going to have all of this information posted on the city's the Project Engage page. And we'll also have a survey that's going to be live starting next Monday, I believe. So if we kind of rushed through this, but if folks who attended want to take a little more time reviewing concepts and putting your thoughts together, you can do that too. You don't have to stay late with us if that's at all helpful.
I'm happy to stay, for another half hour or so if anybody wants to stay on and ask more questions or provide more feedback.
Again, I have a whole paper of thoughts and questions, but I'll be willing. I was hoping to come on Thursday night, but I am leaving for Mexico on Friday morning, so we'll see how that works out. But
Huh.
but if you're willing to stay and other people are willing, that's great. And I'll let other people speak first if they have any other thoughts, certainly.
I don't have any other comments in the chat other than from Kay Pierce. She loves the design concepts. I do think some type of site appropriate fencing is a good idea, as it can be hard to keep an eye on everyone in a group of young children. For observation tools, particularly for observing tree canopies, perhaps tools like periscopes and/or video feeds could be used to increase accessibility. Those are the only comments I had in the chat. Just want to let you know.
Oh, those are great comments. Yeah, and another thing we've been talking about, and I think the Parks Conservancy may already do this, is, being able to check out sensory tools from the Frick Environmental Center, so that not everything has to be permanent, vandal-proof, weatherproof, but that you could, get a hand lens and a magnifying glass and, various, maybe, hearing amplifiers or, things at the Frick Environmental Center. I think, Michelle, if you want to go ahead with your questions, if you
Okay,
have others in the chat.
I love this. First of all, I love that Paschik's doing it. I've worked with Jim Paschik for years.
Oh,
And
good.
and with John Burkle and with, and
Mhm.
I know Heather. The rest of you I looked up, I don't know you yet, but anyway, I used to be Parks and Recreation Director of Murrysville. So,
Oh, okay, yeah.
so I have some background with this, but this is fabulous. I'm so happy the Conservancy is doing this. It's like almost brings tears to my eyes. And usually I'm yelling at people. So the fact is that there's a couple things. One, I thought from the observation deck, not a lot of room there currently. I like the
Mhm.
isolation of it in one, because I just feel like when I'm up there, there's people below me. I know that, but whatever. But I'm thinking, you mentioned that concrete certainly, or any some surface you can feel a imprint of a leaf there.
Mhm.
And I really love that idea that there is, and that people can feel that, and then maybe those who can see it can feel it and then try to identify it on the trees when they're there. I'm also thinking about birds, insects, and other critters, and my favorite, the deer,
Mhm.
is somehow sculpture, somehow touchy something with
Yeah.
them. I don't know what or where, but something that people who can't see, which we hardly can see them anyway, and I don't know what small animals are left in the park, I really don't, but that what would be the kind of animals that you find in a healthy habitat in this park,
Mhm.
and that kids could feel them. Now, I don't know that you get feathers on them and everything, but I'm just saying shape,
Mhm.
those kind of shapes. And same thing with leaves. The other thing is the walking, whatever it was, climbing something or other. I'm thinking, I don't know what you're thinking about using there, but I'm thinking if you can use different feels of tree bark
Mhm.
on the climbing stuff somehow. Because every tree just feels so differently. And
Yes.
and again, identification for those who could see, just trying to find them in the park. That would be an activity. You go somewhere, you feel it, and then you can take your kids and go find them. Um, Absolutely, I'm concerned about dogs off leash.
Yes.
I have a dog that is extremely sensitive to other dogs, and we're trying to train them and so forth. And I have been approached by people who, my dog's friendly. Well, no, my dog's going to eat your dog. So, and it's very
I
upsetting.
had a dog who was the same way, and you just get terrified when you see somebody with an off-leash dog.
I have a
'Cause
blue healer.
you know what would
3-year-old
happen.
I have
Yeah.
a 3-year-old blue healer who we adopted at 3. So training is fascinating. But I just think that this area in particular needs more emphasis and enforcement. I don't know how they do it. I don't know who does it. I don't, but on that this is a sensitive area somehow, that this is the prime place that people absolutely have to have their dogs leashed and controlled, whatever.
Right. And there's an issue with, people having guide dogs. You don't want a
Absolutely.
strange dog coming up and messing with your guide dog. So,
Absolutely. So all that,
um,
that to me, this is the area that can make that point, then the rest of us can, I don't know. So that was to me important. The other thing is, Aaron knows, I am big on the health of the park, and that's why I love the meadow. And so to me, if you're going to put up fencing, and the fencing is lower for cute and whatever, I would love to see an example. Now, this may not be in this project of it. You have a deer exclosure somewhere. And I really think that if we're going to teach people what healthy habitat looks like, we need that somewhere. Now, this may not be appropriate for this particular project, but I did notice that popped up. So
I did want to point that out. I skipped over it because of lack of time, but
I know.
we did think there might, this is very small, but there might be the opportunity to kind of use the structure of the observation deck as well as some additional fencing.
Yeah.
Remove this existing path and
throw it.
keep deer out of a little area, and then you could also, maybe have some interpretation or education.
Yeah, to me, goats are good. And, you know, the fencing around is good. I have to figure out where all the fencing is in the park for the deer exclosures. But the fact is that something that's that close that can show the health and the regeneration of what nature can do for itself. If we have a place for it to regrow. So that's just.
Deer are a huge challenge in this part of the park for sure.
Oh, I know. I'm aware of that. I'm trying to look at my notes. I think that's it. But those were
Well, if
just.
you think of anything else, I think, you know, Brandon, would the best way be through the survey or through, is there another point of contact for folks who might have more comments after the fact?
Certainly the survey is a good way to get feedback, but also you can just directly email me. I mean, there's
Okay.
no,
I'll think-
whatever gets us the feedback easiest for you is.
Yeah, I know your office, so I can find you. I've got you.
Yeah, exactly. Bang our door down.
He's just gonna stop and knock on your door, Brandon.
Yeah, you never know. Jim Patrick will tell you that. So I just think, I'm just so happy with this. I can't even tell you. It's like helped made my day. So thank you all.
Oh, that's so
what
nice.
you're
Thank
doing,
you.
and thank you for the Conservancy for moving forward and whoever's funding this and however it's going to be. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. We appreciate the feedback, for sure. And for you taking the time to be here. We had two other items in the chat. One was a question, which concept would cost more to construct? Kara, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, we have not done detailed cost studies on either of these yet. We wanted to get some feedback first. I think they are fairly comparable. I would guess that concept 2 might be a little bit more expensive just because of rerouting this long trail and then, you know, potentially more structures involved, but really don't have a sense of the magnitude yet. We do have a target construction budget that we'll be aiming toward. And of course, you know, all these different features along the way would be a part of that as well. Did we have another question too?
There's just a comment from Mallory that it might be good to include some kind of signage that says something to the effect of, please help keep this area safe, accessible, inclusive by keeping pets on a leash.
Yeah.
Remind people why it's emphasized here. That's a really good point, Mallory. I think we can work through clever ways of you know, making sure people respect this area and engage with it the way that we want them to engage with it. So all good points. We've kept you 12 minutes past when we said we would. Are there any other comments, or do people want to go about their day? Again, you can fill out the survey, or you can email me directly if you have any other thoughts you want to share. No need to stay late.
Where is the survey? I somehow missed that. Did I get-
It's we haven't posted it yet. We're going through our public meetings, and then it will be posted live on the Engage page Monday, I believe, is when we'll put it up. So
Okay.
I guess
we'll
this
send
this
out.
should say February instead of mid-January. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. I'll
All
check-
best intentions.
I'll check on it while I'm sipping a pina colada. No problem. Okay.
And that'll be up for 3 weeks, so you have time to fill it out. So enjoy your pina colada. You don't have to think about surveys while you're doing it. One more comment from Rachel. Really likes the larger gathering space near the meadows. Prefer the observation deck to be an offshoot, so it feels more private. Yeah, I think we've heard that in a couple other meetings as well. So that's good feedback.
Sounds like there's maybe a preference for the nature discovery space in concept 2 and the nature trail from concept 1, something along those lines.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, folks, thank you for joining us. We apologize for the late start and the technical difficulties, but we really appreciate the time you spent and look forward to getting more comments from you or hoping you stay engaged with the project as we march forward. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
everyone. Thank you, team.